dramatic slowdown.
Across North America, a new conflict is rising, and it has nothing to do with tariffs or trade routes. This time, the fight is over water. Donald Trump has set his sights on Canada's rivers and lakes, calling them the key to America's survival as drought tightens its grip across the South. The demand is bold, the pressure relentless, and the message from Washington grows louder with each passing week. In Ottawa, the response is defiant. Prime Minister Mark Carney, once known for his quiet work in banking halls, now finds himself thrust into a role he never asked for, standing guard over Canada's sovereignty. These quarrels over steel, lumber, and autos has spiraled into a showdown that could alter the balance of power on the continent. So the question now is clear. How far can this struggle go before the push for water turns into something far more dangerous? Donald Trump's latest declaration has stirred one of the most intense disputes ever to hit US-Canada relations. From a stage in Washington, he described Canada's rivers as a vast supply waiting to be tapped, a resource that could quench America's drought-stricken lands and restore stability to states gasping for water. At the center of his remarks stood the Columbia River, a system that winds for more than 2,000 kilometers through the Pacific Northwest, crossing from British Columbia before entering U.S. territory. His demand arrived the very moment Washington paused negotiations to modernize the Columbia River Treaty of 1961, a pact that had carefully balanced flood control and hydroelectric benefits for decades. With one statement, Trump transformed water from a shared responsibility into a bargaining chip, signaling that the United States would treat Canada's rivers as assets it could claim in the name of survival. The shock in Ottawa was immediate. Advocacy groups, indigenous communities, and environmental organizations rallied together, warning that giving up water sovereignty would unleash consequences far beyond a single river. Over 80 coalitions raised their voices in opposition, framing the demand as an assault on sovereignty itself. Prime Minister Mark Carney, a leader more known for financial expertise than fiery politics, responded with rare firmness. He stated plainly that Canada was not for sale and that its rivers and lakes would never be treated as commodities for foreign governments. His words carried an unmistakable finality, drawing a line that could not be crossed. Within hours, negotiations that had once been routine turned into an international confrontation, watched with growing unease not only across North America, but in capitals around the world. The refusal carried an immediate cost for the United States. Western states, which had been promised new flows of Canadian water, suddenly faced the harsh reality that relief would not arrive. California, Nevada, and Arizona had been banking on diversions that might keep farmland alive, protect your harvests, and ease the burden of long-running drought. In the Central Valley of California, where irrigation sustains much of America's fruit and vegetable production, farmers were told to prepare for incoming water that never came. Empty canals and restricted allocations replaced the promises, and the sense of betrayal spread across America's agricultural heartland. The fallout was enormous because California's output feeds much of the nation. Nearly 40% of America's vegetables and 2/3 of its fruits and nuts are grown there. Without water, those harvests withered, yields declined, and supermarket prices climbed. Families already burdened by inflation saw the impact reflected directly on their grocery bills, while economists warned that shortages in lettuce, almonds, and tomatoes would ripple through global supply chains. What began as a political declaration in Washington had now reached the dinner tables of ordinary households. Agriculture, however, was only the first sector to feel the shock. Trump had framed Canadian water as a key to industrial growth and technological strength, and companies took his assurances seriously. In Arizona, massive semiconductor facilities depend on tens of millions of gallons of water every week, and executives had anticipated a secure supply under the president's plan. Energy plants, hydro-reliant manufacturers, and resource-intensive facilities throughout the Midwest and Pacific Northwest had also been promised relief. When Canada closed the door, those expectations collapsed. Production lines slowed, shifts were reduced, and companies began warning of shortages that could spread into electronics, automobiles, and even defense manufacturing. The disruption spread through the industrial heartland. States like Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin, where Trump had pledged a resurgence in steel and auto production, confronted layoffs and production delays tied directly to water scarcity. Steel mills cut back, assembly lines paused, and workers faced mounting uncertainty. The narrative of national revival through resource independence unraveled, replaced by anxiety over whether factories could maintain output at all. Energy producers faced their own crisis. Hydroelectric plants in the Pacific Northwest, already weakened by years of low reservoirs, had hoped Canadian reserves could fill the gap. When that hope evaporated, utilities scrambled to meet demand by firing up coal and gas plants, reversing years of progress toward clean energy and driving up costs for consumers. What had been promised as stability instead delivered scarcity and higher bills. The political optics were stark. Trump had vowed to display strength and eliminate dependence on others, yet the episode revealed the opposite. Canada, a smaller neighbor, had blocked his demand outright, exposing the limits of American leverage. Across the border, borderland communities were rattled further by Trump's suggestion that even the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, a cornerstone of cross-border cooperation, might be abandoned. That prospect terrified cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland, where tens of millions rely on the lakes for drinking water. Decades of trust built into international agreements suddenly seem fragile, and the thought that freshwater protections could be bargained away left many unsettled. Markets reacted swiftly. Investors began factoring water security into decisions, marking agribusiness and manufacturing as sectors at risk. Agricultural stocks dipped almost overnight, and concerns spread to technology and energy companies with high water demands. Volatility in these sectors quickly made its way to consumers who faced higher prices for food, energy, and electronics. The refusal in Ottawa had triggered a chain reaction that touched nearly every layer of the American economy. For Canada, the decision marked a turning point. By refusing to bend, Carney demonstrated that sovereignty outweighed short-term benefits, even under the threat of U.S. retaliation. Washington had long assumed Canadian resources would remain available in times of crisis, a quiet reserve that could always be tapped. That assumption was shattered, and in its place came a new reality. Canada was willing to bear the consequences of defiance to preserve control over its natural wealth. For the first time in generations, American dependence on Canadian resources stood exposed. The conflict revealed more than a dispute over rivers. It signaled that water, once taken for granted, had become the world's most strategic resource. In the 20th century, power revolved around oil. Today, the same is true for water. Canada's reserves had once reassured the United States, silently suggesting that no matter how dire the droughts, a lifeline to the north would remain open. That comfort has now disappeared, and the consequences are global. Everywhere, water scarcity shapes geopolitics. In the Middle East, nations battle over the Euphrates and Jordan rivers. In Asia, the Mekong and Brahmaputra divide upstream powers from those downstream. Trump's confrontation with Canada did more than unsettle North America. It cast Canada as a central player in a global contest over resources. For allies and rivals alike, the message was clear: Ottawa had become a gatekeeper to one of the world's most valuable assets. The Columbia River Treaty illustrates how this moment redefined the landscape. Signed in 1961, it was praised as a model of cross-border cooperation, balancing American flood protection with Canadian hydroelectric profits. For decades, it served as an example of peaceful management, seldom drawing controversy. Trump's decision to suspend its renewal turned it into a warning that even long-standing agreements could unravel under pressure. Around the world, governments took note, recalculating their expectations of American reliability. For Canada, the treaty became proof that water could be wielded as a tool of national power. The Great Lakes added yet another dimension. Supporting 40 million people and anchoring hundreds of billions of dollars in commerce, they are central to both countries. Their shipping lanes connect North America to Europe, Africa, and Asia. Trump's suggestion of destabilizing protections for those lakes did not only shake confidence in Canada, it also sent a signal to global markets that even the continent's most dependable freshwater system could become a political bargaining tool. The uncertainty alone was enough to push investment away and raise alarms over whether water security could ever again be taken for granted. Moreover, Beijing, long skilled at securing vital resources from African mines to Central Asian pipelines, is now turning its eyes toward a new frontier. Quietly, Chinese companies have begun probing opportunities in Canada's water sector, floating offers of investment in exchange for future access. For Beijing, water is not simply a commodity. It is the foundation of survival for its industries and expanding cities, a resource as strategic today as oil once was for the West. Across the Atlantic, Brussels is drawing up its own plans. European policymakers, worn down by years of recurring droughts, are beginning to see Canada not as a distant partner, but as a potential lifeline. Southern Europe's farmlands, scarred by relentless dry seasons, are looking abroad for salvation. Canadian freshwater is now being built into long-term survival strategies. What once sounded like speculation has taken on the weight of inevitability. History offers a warning. In the 1970s, oil was never expected to be wielded as a geopolitical weapon, until OPEC's embargo shattered assumptions and redrew alliances overnight. Today, water carries the same disruptive power. Prime Minister Mark Carney's refusal of Trump's demands was more than an act of sovereignty. It was a declaration that Canada now controls a resource with the potential to reshape global alignments. That message is echoing far beyond Washington. In Asia, governments battling droughts explore long-term arrangements for Canadian agricultural exports. Each deal reduces U.S. leverage while raising Canada's profile. By 2030, vast swaths of the American West could be locked in unrelenting drought. Without Canadian cooperation, the U.S. will be forced inward, leaning on costly technologies and conservation measures to sustain itself. The tools exist, but can they be built quickly enough? Will the nation commit to the price required?